Okay, so welcome to another episode of U+WE Teachable Moments, and this week we've got Emma from, I want to say wellbeing, but I often mix up wellbeing and disability services, which I also do when I send students to you guys.
Okay.
We almost say you should go to wellbeing/disability, and they'll figure out which way to point you from there. So Emma started during the apocalypse, which is an interesting take. So that'd be fun to hear about. So how did you end up working for, well, not working for UE, but was it kind of a, we know there's going to be a big well-being issue, so let's advertise a bunch more places, or were you already in the process of joining us and then hell hit?
Okay, I'll start as best as I can from the beginning. So clarify, first of all, I am from the Wellbeing Service. I am, my official job title is Senior Wellbeing Practitioner, brackets counselling. So there's two, broadly speaking, there's two main teams that you would see within the Wellbeing Service. That's the mental health practitioners, the counsellors. We've also got other people that we work with really closely. So yeah, I'm one of those people, basically. So when the pandemic actually started, sorry, I will try to make that sound better. When the pandemic started, I was working at another university, a little bit further away, so I had quite a big commute to work. Pandemic hit, and it all just, yeah, there was obviously lots of changes, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute, in terms of like changing working practices and all the things we had to learn along the way. But in terms of me starting at UE, it was just one of those kind of natural things that happened. So I think there was a staff member that left, and the role was advertised because they had left. And I'd been looking to work in Bristol for quite a long time, had heard about UE, knew kind of good things about the Wellbeing Service, heard that it was quite a nice place to work. So I applied for the job, and then I started on the 1st of September 2020.
So you were eyes wide open, like I'm not going to see my new office for quite some time.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so I knew I'd be starting fully remote. And I think, interestingly, like I feel like that's probably been a really good thing for me in terms of understanding the student experience, because I sort of started at UE at the same time as a lot of our, first year.
September 4th.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's always a good time to start in university, isn't it? Like the beginning of the academic year. So you kind
Oh
of,
yeah, learn all our words and terms while doing the full job with no
yeah,
time to breathe. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
super busy, and yeah. But yeah, no, it was a good transition over experience. I think it helps that I've worked in universities quite a bit before, for quite a few years. So at least you don't have to get your head around the rhythm of the academic year. For me, it was just another academic year.
Yeah. And you know the kinds of not patients, but you know the kinds of people that are going to come to you with the kinds of problems rather than moving from, say, an NHS. So what's the background then if you're a counsellor, but we also have mental health practitioners? What's the difference there in terms of your skill set?
Yeah, so the mental health practitioners the simplest way to describe it is that they deal with the breadth, and the counsellors would deal with the depth. So the mental health practitioners will work with people. I mean, the service is essentially kind of solution focused. But yeah, they will work with people on a really practical level in terms of like coping with their mental health symptoms, and kind of stabilizing, so they can just sort of get on and do the work that they need to be doing. That's what they're all here for, is to come and get their degrees. We're here to help them do that as best they possibly can. So the mental health practitioners work in a more kind of in a kind of broader way. So they'll look at all the different things that are impacting somebody's mental health, and help them kind of look at those. And they make really kind of really focused sort of like wellbeing action plans. So it's really practical focus, like these are things that you can do that will improve your wellbeing and improve your mental health, so that you can get on and do the studying that you want to be doing. And in the counselling, we tend to work more at depth. So you might only sort of take like one or two issues, but we work with it at a greater depth, and all students are entitled to up to 6 counselling sessions per academic year, and we work with a one at a time model. So what that means is essentially it puts the student in the driving seat of when they book their sessions, so they don't have to come to counselling and like sign up to a 6-week block, for example, or an 8 or a 12-week block as you might get in the NHS. With an enormous waiting list. Usually they can, the idea of the one at a time booking is that usually you can get an appointment much faster. And, if you only want one session, you only have to have one session. If you want to come back for 3 or 4, or if you want to use sessions on a kind of monthly approximate basis, then you can do that as well. So the sorts of issues that people would bring into counselling to work with at depth are things like grief, loss, relationships, all those kind of issues.
God, you have to deal with relations. Like, I mean, we must be talking family ones as well, but are we talking partners and stuff? Because that's if
sometimes,
it's impacting. Wow, because that's got to be hard at uni when there's partners you've left at home, as like college boyfriends and girlfriends, and moved away. And good Lord, that's so high drama in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's pretty high stakes stuff, but I would just give the example in terms of relationships as well. It's not just about the kind of 18 to 25-year-olds who are in that stage of life, but also like when I've seen mature students, for example, sometimes, maintaining their relationship kind of can be challenged by them going through the process of getting a degree, for example.
Yeah.
It can be hard to balance studying and family and all of
Does
those
it
kind of things.
sometimes be the relationship between them and, say, their children? So Veronica, who I chatted to last week, has 3 boys, and has obviously had to balance a lot of the motherhood side with the study side, but also how she relates to them, particularly during the time of them being around all the time. So do you get some of that as well? That not just partners, but distancing from their kids and things?
Yeah, relationships, just generally speaking, with all the kind of breadth and different variations that brings. Absolutely, it's all stuff that we would expect to see in counselling, definitely. Yeah.
So I suppose with you're entitled up to 6, do you find it hard to monitor, or I suppose this year, did you find it easier to monitor those who maybe said, oh yeah, I feel like I need some counselling, and they come to the first, and then I guess they elect to go, you know what, I'm good for a while, but it's nice to know I've got a few more. But do you check in on them beyond the analytics that we have to go, it's been about a month, I know you said that you were right for now, but do you want another one, or do you leave it entirely up to them? Is there a nudge, and how's that changed this year?
Yeah, so we do leave it entirely up to them, and that, as far as I'm aware, since the one at a time model has been at UE, is always the way it's been, and that's partly because it's about empowering people to take responsibility for their own sense of what they need. So there isn't any nudging, but also on a really practical level, like for me as a practitioner, there just isn't the time in the day to to go back to having seen somebody 4 weeks and going, oh, it's been 4 weeks since I saw that person. That space just does not exist in my diary to be able to do that.
That's true, because when I emailed initially, just generally to wellbeing, I think it was, said, does anyone fancy having a chat? And I got an almost immediate response that, yeah, there's no one with 5 minutes in their lives right now. That's not happening. Because I thought interesting perspective to get, because you deal with the other side of what they're all going through and hear about it, and you're officially the people that do the thing that a lot of us academics bumble our way through while we're signposting, because they come to us initially, and I'm horrible at it. Well, not horrible, not horrible at it, but because we can't, obviously you can't hug anyway, let alone this year, but you can't offer a welcome, so that's really hard, and you can't, unless you're a counselling fan. They've come to me with a thing, and it's hitting them emotionally. It's not hitting me emotionally, and I'm not really trained to give good advice on this. All I can do is almost the there, or frequent nodding and a lot. And that feels like I've just,
active listening skills.
just feels like I'm screwing up the whole process when I do it. Like, would you definitely, because I'm not the guy because I'm too solution focused. I'm like, well, let's just fix this rather than let's strategically, I don't know, nibble at the problem to manage it. I'm not quite.
That's the one. I don't think I've ever heard counselling described like that before. That's a beautiful description. I'm not sure how accurate it is.
I don't think it does it justice at all. But yeah. So I think it is quite. I don't. Has there been a toll? I mean, you said it was interesting starting doing the job online, and thankfully you've worked in other universities, so you've done it face to face. But has there been a bit more of a toll this year that you can't? You've got a disconnect already, and then it's harder to, I don't know, bump into or that sort of thing, if you ever do bump into them on campus?
So, I'm trying to sort of figure out which parts of those questions to answer.
Just ramble, that's what I do.
Just ramble, that's
We get
fine.
there in the end with stories.
So yeah, I guess what you're sort of referencing is the key difference about being a counsellor in 2020 during a global, or during a pandemic, is that, normally your clients come to you with a particular issue or a particular trauma, and, qualified therapists will all do their own therapy so that we are not, being triggered or impacted by the stuff that our clients are bringing. So it's our responsibility to make sure we are emotionally, psychologically well enough to do our work, and to be there for our clients without it having kind of excessive toll on us. That's all part of the training that you do. The big difference about this has been that even though, previously I might have seen clients who have had family members, for example, who have died, and that's something that happens to pretty much everybody. That's something that's happened to me. That was stuff that I could deal with because it's something that I knew was coming. The difference about the pandemic is that I was experiencing that kind of collective trauma of the pandemic at exactly the same time as my clients were also dealing with that and trying to kind of pick it apart and process it. So that has been a really big difference. It's quite unusual that you're in that sort of situation as a counsellor normally.
Yeah.
So yeah, that has been really different, and it's meant that I've had to be really, really mindful about my own well-being in an even more kind of even more aware way. Yeah, extra aware, shall we say. So things like, because I used to work quite far away, I had a really long commute to work. I would usually spend that time like blasting music really loud, like, decompressing from the day.
Yeah. That sounds like heavy duty decompressing, like get all the demons out.
Yeah, well, I was on the motorway, so the music has to be loud anyway, otherwise there's no point. But yeah, that was one of the things that I did to kind of transition from work self and all the things that I was seeing and dealing with there, and then coming home to my husband and my little boy and transitioning into being a partner and being a mother. And all of a sudden I didn't have that anymore. So, I was literally walking into a room and going, oh, I've just finished being mum self 2 minutes ago, trying to get him to eat his breakfast or whatever. And now all of a sudden I have to be work self. So there was a lot of things I did during the pandemic that kind of helped to keep me in work mode, if you like. So a lot of people were like, oh, it's great, I can wear all my like athleisure at home. And I was like, no, absolutely not. It's not happening. Like, I can't wear my mum jeans while I'm working. I have
So
to
you have
be.
that degree of separation. You go, right, work clothes and
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. For me, it has to be that way. And in the beginning, particularly, I was really disciplined, like because I suddenly didn't have a commute anymore, which was wonderful, not having to sit in the car. Instead, I would go for a walk around the local park. Like I would walk to work, even though work was actually the room next to my bedroom. I would still go for a walk to work. Yeah, make sure I was wearing my work clothes. So I still had just had all those kind of cues for myself that this was a transition. And also because my son's quite young, he was kind of almost 2.5 when the pandemic started. We had to be really boundaried, and that was one of the big things about particularly being a counsellor during the pandemic as well. Suddenly I wasn't in my workplace anymore, I was in my home. So like my clients can hear my kid screaming in the background or playing or laughing or doing whatever he's doing, and usually there isn't that level of self-disclosure. I am by no means a kind of old school psychoanalytic person who believes in the kind of therapist as blank screen. I'm a humanistic trained integrative therapist, so I'm very much about being a human. That's okay.
wow.
But self-disclosure is still something that we all kind of think about and have to be considerate of, just from an ethical point of view. So yeah, like how is the room decorated? Can they see it? Can they hear what's going on with my family and my neighbours? Yeah, it was all stuff to be considered.
That is some impressive forethought and continuing thought. Because I mean, I'm lucky that I've got my study, but there's been Spider-Man behind me for a
Yeah.
year, and everyone's aware of that. And then I had my first. Normally, well, luckily my wife's in the NHS, and so we had places offered for both our youngest, who's in nursery, and our eldest, who's in school. But we were like, right, well, the eldest can do schoolwork and amuse herself, so that's fine. We'll keep her home, but we'll send him in because he's only 3. That's gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
and she was going to be out seeing patients, and I was going to be here, so I let's do that. But Fridays is his day at home, and my wife's day off. Except it's not a day off because mum all day.
Yeah. Different sort of unpaid
You know,
work.
yeah, a lot more busy, arguably. And I had my first proper award board as program lead,
Mm.
and it was on a Friday, and Teams noise suppression hadn't been introduced yet, which is a very
Right.
useful thing. I don't know if you can hear the drilling going on in the background, but we're having so that's all going on, and
Right.
you know there's a crisp packet test you can do. You crumple it by the microphone, and
Right.
you can't hear it, but you can hear me speak, and it's very handy.
That's
You didn't
amazing.
know?
I need to get on that.
Oh
I need
yeah,
to get on that. Love it.
settings and devices, and then noise suppression. Put it to high. Dogs
Amazing.
can bark in the background, music, everything. So, and that hadn't been invented as such yet. And it was my turn for the award. But we've been at like an hour at this point, and that's when my 2 children decided to murder one another from 2
Yes, as they
floors
do.
down. They were going ballistic, and Jerry, who was our AD of Teaching and Learning for the faculty, who happens to live near me, he said, "Is that Lucy and Ollie? Do you want to go do that?" I'm like, "No, no, it's fine, it's fine." But Em will deal with that, I'm sure. And you're like, "Student number da da da," and there's just wailing going on in the background, and everything you're just muting in between
Mm,
every bit of your sentence.
yeah.
But they've appeared. It doesn't. I suppose it doesn't work for counselling, does it? Because like
Well,
Lucy's
imagine.
appeared in meetings a lot, and that's
Yes. Yeah.
fine. But you can't have
Definitely not
yours
okay
now
in my
for
job.
you. Yeah, exactly. And you
Definitely
thought a
not
lot more about
okay.
it. The walking, I went with, I mean, it was summerish, so I went with shorts, and I've got an in-person governor meeting in a couple of weeks, and I'm like, do I have to wear trousers? Like,
Oh,
are they going to make me
yeah.
put on a jacket or something like that? That's 'cause it's at a hotel, and they're like, I'm not ready for that, and it seems after now, everyone having seen us in, except for you, who's separated the wardrobe, as it were, quite sensibly, I think now, because now we're stuck in a bind where people will think we're not being authentic when we rock up to work now, not in pajamas is taking it a bit far, but you know, when we're suddenly in, say, even if I put on a buttoned up shirt, people are going to go back,
People be
no,
like,
that's
oh,
weird.
you're
That's
smart
not
tonight.
right
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
So, but I think you planned better for this. Definitely. You planned for the end of the end times. And that's
Well,
probably healthier. Did you find that's healthier? That always sort of thinking this separation is important for not only the stuff you have to take on board, but also, and like I say, that lacking decompression time. But just when we're back, I need to be able to maintain those 2 different sides, and keep that momentum going. Whereas,
yeah, I don't think I did it like consciously thinking about the end because there's been so much uncertainty. To be honest, I'm not even sure it really is sort of near the end now. It was more about in the moment needing to, um, yeah, needing to keep both of those things like separate whilst they're all existing within my house. So like the meeting that you described where your 2 children were like attempting to kill each other, like imagine that sort of noise going on when you're in the middle of a counselling session and somebody's talking about uh, you know um, like the death of their mother, for example. Like it makes the challenge of working from home when you're doing this kind of emotional work, is you can hear the other kind of emotional work that might be going on in your house in terms of family, as well as having to be very, very like part of what we do as counsellors is bring our presence and our awareness and our concentration and our listening skills to what people are saying. So yeah, all of those kind of practical things around having really clear boundaries on the room for my son. So like, again, because he's quite little, I'm in the spare room, but now it's called the office, and we
yeah,
had to be that clear with him immediately from the beginning. That when mummy or daddy are in the office, you don't knock on the door, you don't open the door. We need to be downstairs. And I'm like, when I was on my days where I wasn't working, my husband was, I was constantly going, shh, daddy's working, remember? Like I'm whispering to him and he's going, what? Daddy's working. And I'm sure my husband's doing the same, was doing the same thing. So
but I
that was the
suppose you
first
never
lockdown.
knew, did you? That it must have worked because if you didn't know he was going to, you know,
Yeah, exactly. So that those kind of exercise walks to get out were vital, in the beginning as well. Like I was just remembering about the first lockdown that we actually weren't allowed to leave our homes. Like I just had this moment this morning where I was like, oh my gosh, there was this whole thing about like people who are in domestic violence situations. Like, are they even allowed to leave their homes to seek a place of safety? And then the government kind of had to suddenly start saying like, yes, you can leave for a place of safety. Like that's
Making
an
it up
okay,
on the
that's a
fly. That we
legal
didn't think of that
reason.
one.
Exactly, like that's a legal reason to leave your house. So yeah, like it was a blessing when the childcare came back,
Yeah.
because
Did you not get a place? Because I suppose that, yeah, I would have thought because you only really needed one member of the family to be in a job that required it. And yours sounds like it's one, well, that's a no-brainer. Like this is the mental health of others. Give me
yeah,
nursery.
counselling was never on the like on the national like key worker list. But we did have a massive stroke of luck. I'm calling this a stroke of luck. I saw it as kind of a good thing. So when the pandemic initially started, as I said, I was at another university at the time anyway, and my son usually goes to a childminders. They had to close, which was, disappointing for them because they're a self-employed couple. They're amazing. I love them. They're absolutely brilliant. And all of a sudden, half their livelihood was sort of taken away from them, and I don't think they could access support from the government either. So yeah, anyway, so that was the childminders, and I was working 3 days a week, and my husband does 5 days a week in 4 days. But because he had just started a new job, and if they could have furloughed him, they probably would have. But because they couldn't furlough him, they changed his hours to 3 days a week. But actually, 3 days a week each, I reckon, to all the future parents out there who might be listening to your podcast, it's the perfect balance. 100%, it was the best thing ever, because it meant that we both did two and a half long days of work each, and our son was so happy that he was with us all the time. He loves his childminders. He constantly talked about them and was like, when can I go back to their house?
Yeah.
But in terms of landing on our feet in the pandemic, like both having to work 3 days a week, being able to balance that perfectly for childcare was amazing. It meant that neither of us were ever having to do that thing where you're trying to look after a child and also do the work at the same time. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. And by the time when the childcare started to reopen, that was when my husband's hours went back up to his normal contract. So
And is that now technically worse? You're like, oh, I miss it when you were 3 days.
a little bit, yeah. Like I do feel like we had a better balance because
Yeah.
we both finished work, at a reasonable hour. We could all, yeah. It was definitely quite a nice work-life balance in that sense.
Although with it being, like academic workloads are something of a work of fiction. We have bundles, but people work on the weekends to get stuff done, but they just never tell anyone that they did it, even though we know they did it. So it looks like you're coping. And professional services staff don't have that model, do you? Where it's this frustrating currency of, well, I'll mark those things, but it will cost you a bundle. It means nothing. It's made up. And you guys just have to do the days. But when you went down, well, I suppose you were on 3 days anyway, but do you find that it did bleed over a bit more because you were doing the hours rather than going, well, I haven't got a commute, so I'll start early? But do you find it easier to maintain a strict, this is the work that's being done today? There's no going back up to the spare room at 10 at night to finish
Yeah.
up. Is it easier to do when it's more of a, I guess a set portfolio of responsibilities, you know?
Yeah, is it easier to do? I mean, obviously we don't book client sessions for 10 o'clock at night, so that helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's partly about when you are working therapeutically, you do have to be really boundaried about your work anyway. Like part of the healthy thing with clients is to keep appropriate boundaries. So, if the session starts at 10, the session starts at 10. If it's supposed to finish at at 11 o'clock, it finishes at 11 o'clock, because that's modeling those kind of positive boundaries in these relationships. I'm pointing to you and me going
Yeah.
like, what we
Yeah.
do when we turn up on time is we demonstrate that we respect each other and that kind of thing. So boundaries are really important in the kind of therapeutic profession anyway. Having said that, sometimes I do start sessions a couple of minutes late, and it's usually because I'm going like, make the computer work, join session, join session.
I mean, I don't think we help those boundary things because everyone in the world still goes with the, well, we'll start the class, and this is on campus. We'll start the class in a few minutes because there's still people dragging themselves in. We should be a
Yeah.
lot more like you and go, no, we're starting at 10. That's when I start
Oh,
lecturing.
that's when, yeah.
So we're probably not helping you with that. We're sort of teaching your clients you can always be 15 minutes late. It's fine. Um, yeah.
I suppose that doesn't necessarily help them in the work world, does it?
Not
But
really.
equally,
No,
I
well,
think
unless they stay in academia. Yeah, there's a lot
it,
more flexibility.
exactly. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's one of the appeals, I think, for a lot of people, isn't it, of working in academia, that actually it loses that kind of 9 to 5. You have to work these precise hours. To actually, it's about the meaningful work that you do, and if you get the job done, then it's a bit more flexible in terms of when you do that.
Yeah, which has been important with people changing patterns anyway. And some of them are starting to go, oh, I kind of like that work doing 2 till 4 in the morning, but then having a line or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that's been quite handy.
Sounds
Yeah.
insane to me, but yeah.
I know, I don't know
I
why
can't
anyone does
imagine
that. You
working
know
in
when I
the
work better during primetime TV? Well, I know we can stream now, but that's insane. That's when we all sit on the sofa. Presumably you have to write up a lot of notes and strategies and stuff like that. So that's got to be the work that's less fixed in time. Does
Yes.
that, you know, do you still maintain that? I haven't finished writing this report, but that's it. It's 6. I'm done.
Yeah.
Time to go downstairs and instantly start making tea for someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I personally, I'm quite precise about when I do that. So for me, like, I have to write the notes when I'm fresh from the appointment, because otherwise I feel like I'll lose details that are really important. So yeah, I do it straight away. And if I've only got 10 minutes to write my notes, then I only write 10 minutes worth of notes. The where that changes is, if, like yesterday, for example, I was on duty, so we have like a wellbeing duty system.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where you deal with some of the more kind of reactive stuff. Or I think, and I hope I'm not blowing any kind of big secrets about this, but I think we're moving to the model of describing the support in terms of like response. So like there's places where people go for drop in and a response where you need something quite quickly, and then the support which we offer in the wellbeing service is appointment based. So that's work that you can do when it's planned for and people have made a commitment to come, and they're basically saying like, yes, I'm ready and willing to make these changes and to make some changes in my life, essentially. So that's the kind of support that we do in the wellbeing team. And the response stuff is more of the reactive work. So at the moment we have a wellbeing duty system where one or two members of the team are on duty dealing with the kind of reactive stuff that might come in. So if you see somebody there who's quite high risk, obviously there's a lot of processes that we have to follow, and that's where the kind of paperwork database element becomes a bit more onerous, and that's where time can run over, and you're making sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all the T's,
Yeah.
and some of it's just quite slow. So yeah, it's just, there's a lot of it to do. Yeah, so
I
that's
think it actually
that's
helps
more
me
time.
understand my wife's day to it. Well, she recently changed. She's now a specialist in what she does. She's community physio, and she always describes rapids and planned. And I try
Right.
to
Yes,
understand it, but
exactly.
I've never left academia, so I don't understand. Um, and she quite openly says, I've no idea how her day works. She's right. But that idea of there's the rapid lot, as I seem to get it, sounds like the reactive stuff where it's these have been discharged from hospital and they need seeing now so that they don't go back in. And then the
Yeah.
planned stuff is where you've made contact with the patient and arranged particular therapy with them. And
Yep.
that sounds like a similar thing. So not so much
Yeah.
a triage, but a way of identifying the needs and
Absolutely.
splitting the service, as it were, to make sure you
Yeah.
address both of those. That sounds
Yeah.
quite a healthy way of doing it. It
Yeah.
also makes it easier for those that are searching, because I know when I was talking to my level ones in the first episode, and the second part they were talking about their well-being and that they used the 6 counselling sessions.
Yeah.
Um, but if one had, I believe, and other had just sort of done that check-in, and that sounds a bit
Mm.
like what you have with the breadth and the depth.
Yeah.
That it's almost like an assessing to go, well, we can sort of fix this, whereas you could benefit from a bit more of a discussion and getting more detail from you. So it sounds like quite an efficient system.
Yeah, so just to kind of be clear, like the mental health practitioners aren't necessarily like they don't do drop in that kind of immediate rapid response like you're talking about. They still do kind of planned work, which is ongoing with people, but it's it's the kind of the drop in immediate response stuff that's going to be like just described to students differently. I think that's the key point, isn't it, of like trying to help students understand which service they need for what that's going to meet their needs, basically. So yeah, if they need something that's if they're experiencing a lot of distress really like in the moment, then a drop-in service is what you would use. But actually when you're ready to do some work on it in terms of making changes, then what you need is to already be calm. It's a bit like, okay, so let me describe this in a different way. A lot of university counselling and wellbeing services, when the pandemic immediately hit, saw a slight drop, and I say a slight drop in demand. It was a slight drop, and that's partly because when we're all going through this collective thing of like shock, like the world's just turned itself upside down. Actually, what you need at that point in time isn't necessarily counselling or ongoing mental health support, with a trained, experienced practitioner. Sometimes what you need to deal with that distress is actually to do all the things that all of us did, is like, all those Zoom calls with friends, like try and connect with people that we already care about. A lot of people went into that kind of creative mode of like trying to create their new routines and their structures.
Eggs and banana bread.
Eggs and banana, exactly. So like when an event has immediately happened, it isn't always that's necessarily the best time to then like go into therapy. Sometimes there's a bit of a gap, a bit like if somebody dies on the Monday, you don't go, there you go, start your grief counselling on Tuesday, because there's a lot of other ways that people deal with their distress before they get to that point. Some people might do that, and that might be appropriate, but yeah, it's that kind of difference, I guess, is what I was trying to get at.
Yeah,
Has that helped
like a
explain it, or
strange
have I
settling
confused
in
you more?
time, I suppose. No, I definitely understand a lot more about the service now and how it operates, which hugely helps when students are coming to you and you think, well, is this a problem for them as such, or is it a bit of a things are a bit tough? Like there's usually an upsurge, isn't there, in people looking for at least that initial appointment phase within a few weeks of starting, and it's generally homesickness.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether we're any good at, when we're like personal tutors, at determining, because we don't want to send everyone away our well-being,
Yeah.
or whether you go, well, it is homesickness, but also there's some underlying stuff, and we don't know that,
Yeah.
and we're horrible at figuring it out.
It's not your job, so.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know if I'm worse because I'm more of an emotional robot. Really, like I said, I just bulldoze through the problem and fix it, and it just seems easier. I mean, because I'm so digital, it's like I was preparing for years for the apocalypse. So when we all went, some worked from home. I mean, I've upgraded my mic and my camera because I never need to. But I was like, well, I've got everything automated already. I'll just crack on with the banana bread.
Oh, you.
Do one day of whatever the fitness bloke,
Yeah.
John Wick, thingy
Joe
Wick.
Wicks.
Joe Wick, one day of that before the 7-year-old gets bored of it. Whereas everyone else is like, oh my God, there's paper everywhere, and there was big panic stations. So it was a lot easier for me. And I don't know if that has made me more or less used to my students when they've come to me with that initial, I'm finding it really tough, because I didn't at all really. And it was I missed the commute run, like you say, that decompression, because I
Yeah.
go downstairs and then it's straight. In fact, I'm not sure I make it all the way down the stairs before I'm dad all of a sudden.
Right. Yeah.
But so I don't know if I was more or less used to my students because I wasn't going through the same things as them, and I'm that much older. Whereas you've got more. I suppose even though I'm assuming older than 18 and therefore older than them. But
Thank you for the flattery,
we
but
don't like to get
yes.
that sort of thing. That you've got almost like a backlog of stuff you've heard and other people have gone through to draw on. So is it easier to relate to what students went through in that September-y time, where it's still pandemic-y, or
Yeah.
lockdown-y, and they're new?
Mm.
And actually, what was the bigger increase in caseload for you, returning students or new students?
Oh, well, I can't give you the stats on that, but I could find out. We've got some fabulous, well, they're at the admin team, but we affectionately call them the A team because they are awesome.
Nice.
So there's magical people there that could help me to find that out. I'm not sure from my sort of what's my feeling. While we had the kind of immediate drop off in demand, what did happen and again, this is reflected across the whole higher education sector. I'm part of like a JISC mail group where we all talk about like what's going on in our services in quite general terms, which is really awesome. That was a great source of support in terms of the switch to digital. But yeah, everybody was seeing the same kind of thing, and everybody was seeing a real increase in complexity. So I think one of the things that I've noticed in my practice is, you know, people who would have otherwise thrived in the face-to-face, you know, student life, like going out, freshers, people that really thrive on being with other humans and being very social. Those people all of a sudden didn't have the kind of experience that they were expecting, even though, you know, some of them obviously knew, well, they knew that it wasn't going to be the same kind of experience as in a normal year. But there was a massive increase in complexity. So it's almost like, particularly for the kind of usual student population, 18 to 25, these are people that would have otherwise, you know, if they have got like an underlying trauma from earlier in life, for example, you know, normally in those years, quite a lot of people would sort of distract themselves by partying and socializing and doing their studies. And
realize it was a distraction, that they were very social to cover up something that they didn't know. And that's I never thought of that.
So it's not just necessarily those highly sociable people that have come to the service with an increased complexity, but I think what's happened with a lot of young people generally is, you know, instead of going out and living their lives as they quite rightly should be doing, they've suddenly been stuck at home and had all this time to just reflect on stuff that's happened to them. So that's why I think a lot of our services have seen a massive increase in complexity. Like, people are coming forward with abuse much more frequently, you know, sexual assault much more. I mean, that's something that happens a lot in universities anyway, but you know, those kind of issues are coming up a lot more frequently, or just, you know, things that are more complicated because people have got loads of different issues going on all together. So like some of the I have like a private supervision practice as well as doing the counselling work at U+WE, and partly what I'm doing there is working with senior leaders in schools, and it's really incredible to hear from them, you know, the kind of stuff that they've been left with and been holding over the pandemic, and just like the rate of eating disorders that's just absolutely skyrocketed in young people, the number of young people who are being like medicated for things like depression and anxiety at much earlier ages than they would be normally. It's just like those kind of things. Are quite, well, particularly eating disorders is quite a complex thing to deal with because it's got loads of different layers to understanding where it comes from, and how you treat it is quite a complex process. It's usually quite a holistic thing. So there's just those kind of presentations have been coming up a lot more frequently for us and for all the other services. Sorry, I mean, I feel like I've just talked at you, but
no, I mean, it's there's I suppose one side is it was not that it was surprising to hear there was eating disorders, but the number of us that complain about how much weight we've put on in the pandemic kind of puts that in perspective. You're like, well, you could have got off your bottom and gone for more of a run, or put down the cake, because there's so many young people that have, I don't know, either gone further into a pre-existing eating disorder or developed them or whatever it might be. So it does, it's interesting to reflect on difficulties you wouldn't expect, like the almost like middle class first world problems that we've complained about. You're like, oh, there was just nothing on Netflix, and find the other, so, and then the ironic thing, I guess, in terms of the depression, anxiety for young people, suddenly having all this time to reflect, is how we joke about how absorbed they are in devices anyway. You're like teenagers spending half their lives, and actually adults, because even watching TV, adults are sat on the sofa on their phone.
We're all doing it too.
And so suddenly you go, yeah, but you spend so much time on your phone anyway. How is it that suddenly a bit more has flipped something? And so it's important, I suppose, that we don't ignore that sort of thing. Yes, they're on social media a lot, but you increase that to a certain amount, or they're being, because everyone's being bombarded, and it changes something, doesn't it? But they suddenly realize, actually, I'm not feeling good about this. This is the only outlet I've got, is this social media thing. And actually, it's funny you mentioned about the sexual harassment, because, like I say, it's a problem across the sector, and it's gone up a lot this year. And I said, when I heard the statistic, and I think I'm making up 400%. I think I just exaggerated it for the story. But and I was told about it, and I was like, how is that possible? They're not even physically there. They're at home. How is that increased? But of course, it's you know, using the WhatsApp groups, because a lot of WhatsApp groups developed that grew among students,
Right.
whether it's student accommodation. But what you don't realize half the time when you join one is your number's now available to somebody. So anyone in the group can then message you privately, get your number and call you. And there have been lots of messages being passed around of, dubious freakiness, and
Yeah.
it's obviously not
Not always
physical
physical.
harassment,
Yeah.
but there's some dark stuff that's getting passed around. You think it's really hard to stop that, and once you find out who the person is, because their name's attached, idiots, on the then you can do something about it. But it's us finding out about it and that willingness to report, which I guess you say increased the number of reports, and suddenly realizing I'm very much on my own now, and this is happening, and I haven't got friends to turn to that are physically around me and whatnot. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. The reporting's gone up because they're more willing to, but it also shines a spotlight on the horrificness that it's happening as much as we didn't know. And I don't know what the devil can do about that. Really, shout at them more.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
much. I mean, that's a much bigger thing than we can cover in this podcast. I think
True.
probably like.
Thankfully, it's one of those pieces of work that get done
Yeah.
above my pay grade, as it were.
Yeah. Well, it's a big cultural piece, isn't it? Because as we said, it's not just about the culture here at UE. It's about the culture in our society more generally, in our modern
Yeah,
world, and how people communicate and how people respect each other within that, and all that kind of stuff about online education and like teaching people, including adults who didn't grow up with the technology,
yeah,
that what you say online really matters and has a massive impact on others. And online is fabulous because sometimes it can be, if you are feeling quite isolated, sometimes if you wouldn't if you're not the kind of person that might automatically or easily kind of find your people at university, sometimes online is an easier way to find your people if you're a bit more kind of niche or something in the things that you
yeah,
enjoy. And so sometimes online stuff can be an amazing source of support because you actually just get to directly connect with people who are interested in the same things as you, care about the same things as you, and that can be a real strength. And sometimes it can go the other way where actually you're exposed to all sorts of other things in the world. And I think just on that theme of like, um, whether digital life is kind of good or bad, I think Student Minds had a really fantastic video. I think they've changed it into like an article now, like a short read article. But Student Minds is a big student mental health charity. They set up a pandemic resource called Student Space, and they had tons of great resources on there that we were, directing students to. But one of those really brilliant videos was about like, how on earth do I start at university and make friends? Like, how on earth do I
oh,
connect with people when we're all doing everything digitally? And one of the things that they mentioned in there was about how you have to be really purposeful, and this was a bit the same for me, starting at UE completely online in my own home.
that's true. No office
How,
buddy for you.
yeah,
Yeah,
like how on earth do I start making connections with my teammates and get to know, how do I get a feel for the place even though I can't actually feel it and actually be
yeah,
there? So one of the things that I had to do was be really strategic about just booking things in. Like I had to book in sessions to where normally I would meet my colleagues maybe by the kettle and have a
yeah,
chat over a cup of tea and be like, hi, this is me, and you do all that kind of small talk stuff. Whereas actually instead what I was doing was arranging meetings with people, having really like going in fast and deep, like all these big conversations for like an hour, like we're doing now. And then all of a sudden I wouldn't see them again. And it's a really different way of socializing. And for some people, I think it works absolutely amazingly. There are some people who, like yourself, maybe have been prepared for the apocalypse for a long time,
that's right.
don't mind being in their own space, and are quite happy to socialize and do some of that stuff online. I think particularly, for kind of more introverted people, maybe this works really well, because actually they can go, okay, I can control my socializing completely, because I'm not socializing if I'm not online and if I'm not in a
Yeah,
meeting.
and you can step away even when you are in the middle of socializing, as it were, just messaging and
Exactly.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for some people, I think that works really, really well. And for other people, obviously, just to be in the room with somebody would be so nice. And I'm probably more at that end of the scale, to be
I
fair.
think I'm probably in the middle because I mean, like I say, I had the good fortune of established practices beforehand of having coffee every day with the same people on campus,
Mm,
and we've just
yes.
continued that, but it's
Yeah.
now scheduled and it's Java time every day, 9 till 10.
Right. Yeah. Nice.
Um, People still message it like they can see I'm red, and they'll call me on
Mm,
Teams like, no, 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 this is Java time.
yeah.
Um, and I'm missing the. Thankfully, I got to do one on-class lecture towards the end of term because I needed that. Like I'm
Mm,
it's fine online, but it's not my A game. So I was jonesing for that. So I do need that part of it, and I do miss the walking into the office. My two office mates are there, Adam and Sam, and they'll be, "How you doing?" "Oh, you won't believe what the kids did this morning," or "This hilarious thing happened last night," and you do that mini catch up. Whereas now it's more like uh, scheduling a catch up, and you're like,
mm,
that's not how it's supposed to be, you know.
yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if that, like I said, the introverts and how that can work better for them. But we're going to have a lot of work to do with students, both academically and well-being, to make sure that in the future they can talk to people like physically in the
Yes.
room, because we have this there's an idea around the sector about things like students choosing their own assessment format
Hmm.
because they find the idea of, say, a presentation
Yeah.
too daunting and then lacking confidence, and I want to do it as a video I record, and you're right, well, that's fine, we can do that this year, like level one maybe, but you can't do that by the time you get to the end, because unfortunately you can't pre-record a job interview. You're going to have the ability to talk to another human, and so we need to make sure that we're not pushing, we're nudging, gentle poking, that they're in that place rather
Yeah.
than, and that anonymity in classes has been a tricky balance as well, where you've got those who go, well, now you can't tell me off, or you can't really see who I am, which means I can post something inappropriate in a lecture chat
Right.
because I'm hiding behind my keyboard. And then
Oh,
you've got the other
keyboard
side of it, where
warriors.
those who never normally put their hands up
Hmm.
can type in the chat, or they can put up their digital hand, and they're empowered. So
Yes.
it's going to be it's going to be really hard for the tools to suddenly not be able to type something inappropriate in a lecture, because we'll be on them like a shot. And hopefully they'll still show up. But then hopefully on the other side, the students that were started out more introverted, particularly new ones, came in, did all this digitally, enjoyed the ability to be able to,
Yeah.
just mic on and no camera, whatever it might be,
Mm,
to then suddenly have to, well, now, now we need your face in the room, please do show up. And
yes.
that's going to be, I don't know if that's going to increase your work or not, that sudden change to reality with a bunch of students going, well, I'm not used to this now. In class, I
Yeah.
had a panic attack because I was there,
Yeah.
You expecting that?
I think we are generally expecting an increase, definitely. Not necessarily with that specific issue. I'm sure that will definitely be in there. There's people, a lot of people, for example, who are experiencing things like social anxiety. For some people, lockdown was their dream. It was brilliant. They were like, great. I want everyone to stay 2 meters away from me at all times.
Yeah.
For some people, that was the way they would really like life to be. Um, yeah, and coming back out of lockdown and readjusting to actually being in crowds of people again is going to be really different, and not just for people with social anxiety, but even for other people, where we've all been in this really inhuman state where, like, we have to stay away from each other in order to be safe, which is just so against all of our biological evolutionary
Exactly. Yeah.
programming, right?
The idea is you huddle in a cave and share the warmth. You don't go, no, no, stay
Exactly.
outside the cave. It's dodgy.
Yes, exactly. So, we've kind of got used to doing that. I don't know if you're still doing this as well, but sometimes when you see people hugging on telly, you're like, can't do that anymore. I
I'm,
still have
I'm a
that
bit more
moment.
the in the middle. I was downtown yesterday in the centre, and then message mate about it, and he said, "Oh, that's a different afternoon." And I was like, "Yeah, but there's way too many people getting in the way, being slow,
Yeah.
and 7 police officers just arrested a drunk guy. I think I'll head back to the suburbs. Actually, the city, could you go down there? Like, oh, this is why I don't come downtown anymore, isn't it? I prefer my little safety.
Yeah.
So I do like the idea of being able to just go up to somebody and hey buddy, how you doing, and all that sort of thing. But equally, I've quite enjoyed people not being in the way as much, when they
Yeah,
just randomly stop and you do
that's
that
like
thing
if
on
you're
the
living in a
pavement,
city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm probably still in the middle of that one. But you're right, it's going to be a big change, particularly on TV. Do you question on TV? It's almost a subconscious thing where you see, say, talk show guests close, you go, oh, you're a bit close, aren't you? I
Yeah, you
assume
sort
there's
of
been
like
flow
measure the
testing.
distance of like, is that 2 meters? Is it a meter and a half?
Yeah,
Is this okay? Is it not? And I think, a lot of us are absolutely going through that at the moment, that readjustment of like, but what is okay and what isn't? And I think that was one of the other things that the lockdown really kind of demonstrated was how, differently everybody deals with risk in life. Like, I think one of the things, like, I know your podcast is titled Teachable Moments. I think one of the things that I've learned from
well done.
where we're coming up to the end, you can see I'm used to the boundaries, aren't you? One of the things I've learned from it is just about just accepting uncertainty a lot more. And I've had lots of things in my life that have taught me that. Partly having a young child teaches you that
Very true.
uncertainty is kind of always a given. There's always this, like, everything slightly hangs in the balance. um it doesn't mean that I like uncertainty any more than I used to, but I am just a bit more like accepting that, yeah, I'm not going to control this. And I think I was listening to Boris's announcement recently on Monday to say that the lockdown was going to be or not lifted.
Yeah.
It's been extended for the next 4 weeks or whatever. um and I just thought, wow, this is such a difference. If you think back to the Boris Johnson of March 2020, when he was like, yes, it's going to be 12 weeks and it'll all be finished. And he was doing his like, I'm gonna say it, and if I say it confidently enough, then maybe it will be true. And I think to a certain extent we all buy into that idea that we can control our lives that much, or that we have that much sense of certainty, or things will be pretty much the same tomorrow as they were today. We all kind of buy into that in life, partly because it's easier and it makes our brains don't have to work quite so hard. But even him, even Boris now is kind of hedging his bets and going, okay, well, there's no evidence right now, and just in
Just to
case
be safe.
there's another, like, he's not discounting the idea that there might be another variant. So I think if he's gone that kind of transition in terms of accepting uncertainty, I think a lot of
Yeah,
us
because
in
he
the
went
nation.
from because people were saying after Monday, I think more online, they said he promised it would end. You go, no, no. He said the earliest we would open things up further was that date. Not that that's when we were opening things. It's interesting that I don't know if it's paradoxical. As a parent, you've learned, you've become more accepting that there is risk. Whereas because of a pandemic, whereas generally you'd be like, no, no, don't go anywhere near that. You will die. Put on a coat or you will die. I can control
Right.
this risk for my child.
Yeah.
And it's a mum dad thing, I think, because I will let, particularly our youngest, we were on holiday 2019, I think it was, and he was just about to turn 2. Genius, 3 days before he turned 2, so he was free. And
Nice.
big plan these things, and it was half term, so it worked out well.
Yeah.
And there was the baby pool thing, which is about a foot deep, and he was, stumbling about and just trying to empty it. I think, constantly with
Yeah.
buckets.
Yeah.
And every now and then, and I'd be sat there with all these other parents around the edge, and every now and then he'd fall over, and I'd give it a good 5 count before I'd even stand up, because you think, well, you've got to learn to be able to. Whereas if my wife was stood next to me, not only would she intervene almost immediately, but would hit me on the arm for not having intervened faster than her. You know,
Right.
so, but mums and dads tend to be a bit, are you good? You're grand. You're fine. Stand up. Whereas,
That's interesting. I think me and my husband are probably the other
go,
way around, actually. Yeah. I'm probably a little bit more like risk tolerant than maybe. Yeah. I think that's the appropriate language.
I can see why you've learned to accept risk a bit better over time. How has your son not so much been, but coming out
Mm,
of it? Is
mm.
virus now in his lexicon?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh,
Like, he's all, not always talking about, but, the other day he did turn to me and say, like, can we do this when the virus is over? And I'm like, oh, you're like 3.5, and that's what you've learned. Like, but
that's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course we had to, as a talking therapist, I'm all about giving him the right language.
Very good.
So, and it was, oh, can we see grandma? Like, I'm really sorry, we can't see grandma. Why? Like, it was because of the virus, and oh, yeah, such sadness about those words just having to be said over and over and over again.
It does come out, doesn't it? It's almost like a pretend excuse. Sorry, it's because of the virus, and they
Yeah,
say that as well. They go like, well, we can't go here. And Ollie will say that, sort of go, we can't go to soft play because of the virus. And you're like, oh man, that's sad that's,
yeah,
um,
yeah, that's that. But but it's real, isn't it?
yeah.
And better that they have that understanding, than just are generally a bit confused about like why they can't do anything. So
And we didn't see what they're like in about 5 years, well, maybe 10 years when they're more teenagers and
yeah.
will not remember this period at all. But we have some vague thinking of a weird time and people will still
Yeah.
refer to it.
Do you know what though? Like even quite quickly after the pandemic started, I was like, I can see for the next 5, 10, 15 years of my career where, hopefully working with university students all that time, because I love doing this work. It's a really fascinating time to work with people. Even if they're seeing me as a mature student and might be a bit older, I'm still going to be doing that thing of like, right, so how old were you in 2020? What stage of development were you at when
Yeah,
when this
that's
thing happened? Yeah, I think, and a bit like probably therapists of past used to think about, were you, were you born just after the Second World War or weren't you? That whole thing of
yeah.
maybe there'll be a whole set of babies. They'll be called like the post-COVID babies. I don't know,
Oh
but
God. Well, there are those COVID babies that were created in COVID and I suppose born in it as well. Actually, I do that unfair judgment. I think it is an unfair judgment. Now that I'm more than twice the age of my first years,
hmm
I have that harsh judgment of them where I say, like I make a cinematic reference or something, and they won't get it. I'll be like, just to check, when I say Ghostbusters, who do you think of? And they don't say like Bill Murray and Dan. I'm like, oh, I'm judging you. That's what you think Ghostbusters is 2010. That's not right. You're too young. And it's a harsh judgment of their
right.
place in the world,
Or is
uh,
it really the judgment on yourself getting older?
well, that's just it. I'm starting to use the phrase back in the day a lot more. Um,
Yeah, it
which
comes to us all though, doesn't it? That's the
Well, I
thing.
quite enjoy it with my using it with my kids as well. I go back like when they're like, Ollie gets frustrated that there's adverts. You're like, oh, you've no idea,
Yeah, Daddy used to have adverts all the time.
and you used to
not
have
not
to
just this
watch them.
occasion that we watched the one thing on that one channel. Yeah,
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 so
absolutely.
so it's not. It sounds like it's been. Well, have you been in at all? Just to finish up, I just realised because
Yes, I have.
was that a
I
big
have been in.
moment?
It was, and I think my the managers of my team were really great in that the people like myself who had started during the pandemic and had started fully remote, they did kind of prioritize us to try and get us into campus and like do
Okay.
our wellbeing duty days together so that we could get to know each other, because I think that physical sense of being present and like it has made the world of difference to me in terms of making connections with my colleagues. It just makes the work easier because all the IT works sort of better. um,
Yeah.
you know like there is just a sense of ease of being in the place to do the work, and also for clients as well. We haven't seen I haven't seen a lot of students face to face yet, but that is gradually starting to happen, because obviously we have to manage it COVID secure at the moment, keeping a certain amount of people in
Yeah.
the building and all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, when I did my first face-to-face session with a student afterwards, I was just like, oh, it's so much easier to have body language as well. Like all these things that have been missing
Yeah, it's hard to
over.
gesture just in this space. There's a lot of this going on.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I do that all the time as well. So I've had to really restrain it while we're online because I'm aware that it can be really sort of make people feel seasick. So I try not to do lots of kind of shifting around. But yeah, yeah, there is something. So just to finish, hopefully I won't spend too many minutes talking about this, but I was reading an article recently that was talking about like the group of people that design the internet basically, and they have this thing about coming to consensus, and where they all stand in a room and they hum together, and that's how they establish whether there's consensus to make a particular change or not. And I just thought that's a really wonderful example of how actually when you're in the room together, that is something that you can do that you cannot replicate online. There is just humans need other humans, like what we talked about before, that moment in the cave of like, it's not natural for us to be so separate from each other. Humans definitely need other humans, and we need to be in that physical presence of each other at least some of the time. So I think
it's about playing off one another, isn't it? That the you can, like you mentioned about body language, you can read the body language a bit to go, well, are they going to be on board or not? But there's something about almost an undetectable energy, empathetic energy that people give off that give you a sense as to where you all are that you can't get online.
yes,
It's not
absolutely.
on the electromagnetic spectrum, unfortunately, that can be broadcast.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, even just that sense of like knowing somebody else is in the room with you, like, you know, if somebody's walked in a room, you know, if somebody else has walked into that room, even if they haven't said anything, even if there hasn't made a lot of noise necessarily, there is something about being in the presence of each other that we are really finely tuned to pick up. And that's why this kind of digital communication, I think, can be so exhausting for people, because we're like, we can see each other, so our brains are like, well, they're here, but like, where are they? You know, the rest of our central nervous system and our bodies are going like, where's the other information? What do they smell like? And one of the other things I really noticed about my team was when I was going in for the first day face to face, I was like, I don't know how tall anybody is. Like, I don't
I
know.
was really worried giving a lecture, and the first just hadn't seen me. I was like, because you guys can find out that I'm 5'8" on a good day. Like, just give me.
Yeah.
I don't know how tall they think I am on camera. And that's really I didn't
Uh,
realize that at the time.
yeah, and that's really interesting, because I would have put you as like a bit taller than that. I don't know, but for some
It's
reason,
the,
like
as I use the
seeing.
term, stockiness. Gives a
But
sense,
it is that fundamental stuff of, you know, what it's like to be with other humans, and you do, and we do pay attention to those things of, you know, how much taller is this person than me, and how does that change how we talk to each other. And I think that's why you know, the technology is being a great leveler in many ways, because it has made things accessible for some people, much more accessible for some people, as long as they've got the digital capability, of course. But yeah, I think that, you know, it's all the other sensory cues, isn't it? Because we've basically just had visual if we are sighted, and audio if we can see, so I can hear. You know, that's all we've had to pick up on people. But we have all these other senses in our body where we make sense of the world, and yeah, those have been missing, and it's just, for me, it's such a relief to have them back again. I just feel like when I do see people face to face, my whole body kind of relaxes, and I'm like, oh, this is how it's meant to be.
definitely. Yeah. That's a key thing for your job, I think, because you can. One reason I upgraded the microphone was it doesn't matter how good the speakers of the student is. If the audio
Yes.
going in is rubbish, it loses a lot of the message, and that's got to be important for your work.
Definitely all those little cues. You know, we talked about active listening at the beginning, but
Yeah.
I'm quite a quiet person. Like, my voice is quite soft, and in session I do a lot of yes, okay. Like, I know, you know, I do a lot of those kind of small noises that let people know that I'm listening, and I'm really aware that on Zoom and on Teams, um, my voice isn't always loud enough to actually come across. So I'm kind of like nodding
Oh,
even
no.
more on purpose to make sure they can see I definitely am listening. You know. Um,
That's another reason I would not be good. A whole plethora of reasons I'd be no good as a counsellor, but I'm too boomy and growly. It does not convey well in a soothing sense,
I don't think I don't think that would exclude you from doing the training, but voice awareness is definitely one of the things that, you know, is part of the considerations when you're training. Like, it's part of the feedback that you get. And consistently, the feedback that I got was that I'm quite quiet, but also I come across as quite calm, hopefully. So that's, you know, that's a better.
Integral part of it. Yeah. Well, that taught me a hell of a lot about the service, and not only how it operates, but there's a lot of challenges that we don't. I mean, we appreciate them, but we don't get how much you've got to put into it. Definitely, it's more of a. I'm sure they'll take care of it, but it sounds like it's been potentially useful starting online this year. Definitely makes you appreciate going to the office way more than people that, like,
Yes.
oh, the carpets are still dirty,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
probably don't notice that at all. So it's going to be
Yeah.
quite nice for you transitioning back in uh, on your anniversary, as it were, of starting when everything starts again and we're in a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I am looking forward to more in-person stuff, definitely. I do think, in terms of the service, obviously, like, the hybrid model will probably stay.
Mm.
So, you know, I can't see us getting rid of video appointments or telephone appointments. because from an accessibility point of view, it does just work better for a lot of people. But equally, there's a lot of people who will really want and value that face to face.
Yeah.
For me, that will be great when we can do more of that as well.
Yeah, happy day. Yeah, you feel more valuable that way, don't you? Well, it's really nice to speak to someone not in my staffing group. It's nice to learn stuff for a change,
Yeah.
and a completely different perspective. And your setup, no one can see because the video will be stripped out. But your setup is very professional looking. Far less, even though you're in the spare bedroom, it looks far more like it's a I don't know, sensible working space rather than there's a room with all this, like we put a screen in front of this stuff.
Yeah, but it is. I've tried to keep it like a fairly neutral space, definitely.
And with the potted plant there, which immediately makes you think, counselling plants, soothing
Exactly.
plants.
Well, and that's why I
Yeah.
put it there.
See, genius.
I used to be a photographer in a former life, so I do think about the frame and like what's inside and what's outside, and yeah.
Very good. I didn't realise a long time into lockdown that was a piece of paper over that was my address is the other side of that piece of paper,
Oh,
which was just on for people to see where I live.
oh no.
So yeah, that's on there now. So I didn't at all consider the frame. You're far more sensible in the way, this online way. I just sat down and cracked on with the job. You thought about it more, and that's been really important, I think. Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for doing the podcast as well. It's been lovely to listen to what the
Well, you've heard the
experiences
others
of
as well.
others have been, and particularly the students as well. It's really great to hear from other students that that I'm not working with as a counsellor, to like what
Very
their
true. Yeah,
experience
different
has been.
perspectives and seeing what they've been through. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
fantastic. Well, hope to see you on campus. We all say that now, don't we? Hope to see you in person. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But have a great rest of the week, and
Thank you.
talk to you
And
soon.
you. Yeah.
All
Take
right.
care. Thanks,
Thanks, then.
Chris.
Bye bye.
Bye.